Good afternoon. My name is Steve Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. Robert Bonney is the USDA Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, and he's a Senior Advisor on Climate for Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack. Before joining the administration, he served as an executive in residence at the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke University. Previously, he served as director of the Farm and Forest Carbon Solutions Initiative at the Bipartisan Policy Center, where he worked to develop new initiatives to combat the climate crisis through agricultural innovation. During the second term of the Obama administration, Robert was the Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the USDA. In this role, he oversaw the U.S. Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service on a variety of natural resource issues. Robert will be speaking for up to about 15 minutes, and then we'll leave room for question and answer for the balance of the time. So thank you for joining us, Robert, and over to you.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be with you today and great to be with everybody at this important conference and timely conference. So I thought what I'd do is spend a little time today talking about climate smart agriculture and what USDA is doing right now and how we're thinking about it. It's early days, but I think I can give you some insight into certainly where the Secretary is and what we're thinking as we move forward. So as Steve mentioned, I was a member of the Obama administration and came in 2009, also working on climate to the Obama administration. And probably don't need to convince anybody of this, but we're in a pretty different environment as it relates to climate change relative to 2009. When we came in 2009, I think there was still quite a lot of skepticism in agriculture and forestry around climate and climate policy. And while there was a lot of interest in markets and carbon markets and other things from folks in agriculture, there was also a lot of concern. Today, I think we see a lot more interest in climate smart agriculture, a lot more interest in carbon markets. We've had a lot of experience in the intervening years. That's not to say there isn't still some skepticism and some concern that if we don't get the policy solution right, that it may not work well for agriculture and forestry. But I think we're in a different place these days, and the amount of interest and input that we're getting at USDA in these early days is significant. The good news is when we think about climate smart agriculture, and the same is true on the forestry side, there's actually a lot of alignment. By that, I mean there are a lot of practices that we want producers, landowners to undertake that are not only good from a climate standpoint, they're good from a production standpoint. They're good for yields and for producers' bottom line. There's no place that's more the case than that around soil health and soil management. We know well-managed soils produce higher yields, retain water, are more resilient in the face of climate change, and we also know that they store carbon. And so when it comes to soil health, you see this alignment, but that alignment is not just in soil health, nutrient management. As we use nutrients more efficiently, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions just as we maintain bottom line and reduce input costs. Same thing's true on the forestry side. In forestry, good forest management, investment in healthy forests is good not only from a climate standpoint, it's good from a landowner standpoint in terms of health of those forests, their ability to produce wood products, and their ability to be resilient in the face of climate change. So that alignment is I think in no small part the reason that we have so much interest in these issues today, and so much willingness for agriculture and forestry to be looking at this space and interested in contributing. You know, if you look at U.S. agriculture, it's about 10% of greenhouse gases in the United States, but significant opportunities to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to think about carbon sequestration as a important tool in the toolbox as we think about how do we get to net zero emissions by 2050. And if you've heard the secretary talk about this, he's very interested in opportunities for new sources of revenue, economic opportunities for producers, again, to capture that alignment that we see, and to create opportunities for folks on the land to make more money, even as they do good by the planet. So in late January, the Biden administration issued a climate change executive order, asked USDA in partnership with other agencies to do a lot of work around a civilian climate corps, 30 by 30 conservation goal, and other areas. But in particular for USDA, the EO asks us to both do some outreach and then some work in creating a report around climate smart agriculture and forestry. And in the coming days, we'll be setting out a series of webinars, as well as a Federal Register notice. We'll be collecting input on climate smart agriculture and forestry. And that won't be the end of the conversation. We hope it'll be beginning, and that there'll be lots of opportunities for input as we go forward. So let me focus on a few areas of policy that I think will be of interest, and then happy to open it up for questions. Obviously, USDA has significant resources in Farm Bill conservation programs. I know you've heard from folks from NRCS already today, but those conservation programs provide a real opportunity for us to not only on soil health, but to look more broadly at ways that we can incentivize climate smart agriculture and forestry. We've got a general sign up going right now in the Conservation Reserve Program. We're looking for ways to enhance that, the incentives in that program to make up for the 4 million acres. We're below the CRP acreage cap right now. So that presents an opportunity, and we'll look for areas with CRP going forward in continuous enrollment and elsewhere to improve the workability and the desirability for landowners of that program. Obviously, there are enormous opportunities in the Conservation Stewardship Program, in environmental quality incentive programs, and other programs of NRCS, and we'll look for ways that we can prioritize climate smart agriculture and forestry as those programs are rolled out. We're also interested in ways that we can bolster, contribute to carbon markets and bolster private investment. And so as we look at producers that are thinking about participating in carbon markets, the question is there a role that USDA can play in helping make that happen? Right now, if you look at offset markets, though agriculture accounts for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions, as I noted earlier, only about 2% of offsets are in the agricultural sector. And so we need to look for ways that we can invite more private investment into those markets. Maybe thinking about ways that we can provide new financial tools, whether it be price guarantees or actually just helping to incentivize those practices, or even maybe thinking about loans, could be a way for us to actually bring more private investment into the market, and to do so in a way that maybe helps create greater standardization in the market around measurement, monitoring, those types of things. So I think one of the important things we're looking at right now is how USDA can play an important role in those carbon markets. Science is obviously critical as we think about whether it's our Farm Bill conservation programs or new finance tools through something like a carbon bank. We want to make sure that we've got the scientific capacity to prove up these ideas, to demonstrate to the public that soil carbon sequestration, reducing nitrous oxide emissions, reducing methane emissions, all those things that we can measure it, and that we've got a high degree of certainty that we're getting gains for the public investment we make. So investments in measurement, in tools to help producers measure these things, and in ensuring that we can lower the transaction costs and participation of carbon markets, transaction costs associated with measurement, for example. So that's of interest, and I think our investments in science are going to be important. Obviously, resilience is going to be critically important as well. During the Obama years, we started the climate hubs. They've continued to operate, lots of interest, and I think there we look for opportunities to invest in the hubs, to create greater partnerships with whether it be land grant universities or others through the hubs, and to provide good information to producers on climate smart agriculture and forestry. The last thing I'll say on kind of on the policy front is just the importance in equity in all this. You've heard equity talked about across all programs and in the Biden administration, and no doubt across USDA. We want to make sure that the programs we develop work for all producers, small producers, medium producers, and large. We want to make sure that Black farmers, Hispanic farmers, tribes all have the ability to participate. So we want to look for ways that we can invest in technical assistance and make sure that that the solutions we're putting forward and the solutions that we're advocating are available to everybody. So this lens of equity, I think, is an important one. At the end of the day, I think what we want to do is build things that create a conservation toolbox, a climate smart agricultural toolbox that works for all producers, that is responsive to the needs out in the field, that create new sources of income and opportunity, and then makes agriculture more resilient to climate change. Good to be with you all today. Look forward to taking some questions.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate you being here, and we got plenty of time for questions. And so I'll ask as they're coming in on both platforms we're using today. So we'll look at both the questions in Whova and in the chat function here in Zoom. So first question we'll ask is, if the goal is to reduce carbon emissions, how do offsets contribute to that goal?
So I think, it's interesting. I mentioned when we came in 2009, we were sort of living in cap and trade world, and everything was thought about as an offset. We're living in a different world now, and we're thinking about how do we make investments in these types of activities outside of a compliance market. Now, if your question is around kind of questioning cap and trade, I think the argument that people would make around cap and trade is that if you set a target, then you can use different solutions to meet that target. But we're not operating in a cap and trade environment right now. What we're trying to do is to look at ways that you can bolster private investment, whether it be through voluntary targets or other things, into agriculture and forestry. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's going to be very important for us, as I said in my remarks, to be able to prove this up, to demonstrate that the science is there, and to create some standardization in those markets that actually can result in real greenhouse gas benefits.
What is the administration's position on carbon footprint labeling on agricultural and food products?
I mean, I don't think we have a position on it now. I think our real interest is in looking for incentives to bolster these types of activities. I think there is, when I talk to folks, there's interest in standardization and protocols and measurement and those types of things. And there may be a role that USDA could play there in providing more science and in helping to move the market towards greater standardization. And so I think that's probably a place that we'll be interested in working on early on.
All right, great, thanks. Here's a question from a small producer. where should small scale urban farmers, maybe even just an acre, look for opportunities to be paid to sequester carbon? Or is this, are we just looking at the bigger producers to be able to get into
No,
it?
so I think there's interest in small producers, obviously, as well as in urban agriculture. And I should say that you know, carbon markets may be of interest to some folks. They're not going to be of interest to everyone. There may be opportunities for farm bill incentive programs that make more sense for smaller producers or urban agriculture. Likewise, there may be producers that are far more interested in resilience and opportunities to think about how to make their production activities more resilient in the face of climate change. That's why we need a very conservation toolbox. Markets may work well for some, they may not work well for others. And so that's why thinking about conservation programs and other tools like the climate hubs may be particularly important. I think you'll see growing interest in urban agriculture. During the Obama years, we invested quite a lot of resources in high tunnels and other things. So I think you're likely to see some interest there from NRCS. And again, maybe it's climate related investments. Maybe there are other just straight conservation investments in urban agriculture that'll make sense there. Certainly the interest in urban agriculture is very high. I expect that to continue.
Well, since you raised the farm bill, that's coming down the pike already. Hard to believe, but we got another farm bill coming up during your tenure. What do you see as some opportunities to encourage sustainable practices and reward practitioners of climate smart agriculture in the coming farm bill?
Probably early for me to speculate on the farm bill. I will say, I think climate related, I think, what happens, what we're able to do over the next 18 months, 2 years, I think can help shape what we look to in the next farm bill. And ultimately, as you think about climate smart agriculture and forestry, there's always an opportunity to integrate more policy into the farm bill. So I think part of the interest here is to build some things that can influence and create some consensus around things we can do in the next farm bill. Everything from CRP incentives, I think, are important. I think how we think about climate smart ag and in CSP and EQIP, I think, are going to be important issues. And again, are there opportunities to invite more private investment into agriculture through voluntary markets and those sorts of things? So I think all those things are fair game.
Great. What do you see as the role of biochar in soil carbon sequestration and climate resilient agriculture? And what can USDA to help realize this potential?
Yeah, there are going to be a number of places like biochar where there are potentially significant upside opportunities for new technologies, new practices. I know biochar, in a sense, isn't a new technology; it's been around for centuries, obviously. But thinking about it as a climate mitigation and a climate resilience practice, I think is really important. There's obviously a piece of USDA that can do continued research, testing, trials on things like that I think is a place we look to. Also, then thinking about how do you measure the benefits in greenhouse gas reductions, in sequestration, otherwise, I think is really important. So I do think that there are a bunch of technologies where you may think about it on the incentive side, or there's some things you can do with farm bill conservation incentives, and think about it on kind of the investments around science and understanding the implications of these new technologies for the climate.
Great, thanks. Here we've got a question. Do you think a reformed conservation stewardship program It focuses on whole farm systems. Adapting to deal with climate disruption can promote soil health.
Absolutely. I think, I think CSP is already proven really important there. And I think Farm Bill programs broadly, we have to remember, obviously, it's not all just about climate change. There are enormous opportunities for wildlife conservation and water quality benefits. And a lot of times for all those things, there's co-benefits for climate or for climate activities. There are co-benefits for further natural resources. I think, I've been around the conservation programs for a long time. Before I got to USDA at EDF, we worked on the Farm Bill conservation programs. Are great, and they provide a lot of opportunities here. They're not designed, they're not designed as well to think about how do you tap into potential private investment in climate smart agriculture and forestry. That's a place where I think we can look to add to the conservation toolbox. But I think CSP has a enormous potential, as do the other Farm Bill programs, to again create a toolbox that has a lot of options, given the diversity of agriculture and forestry across the U.S.
Great. So here's a question that is a subject of hot discussion within my staff. We'll see how you handle this one. With regards to measurement and verification, do you anticipate that the USDA NRCS will propose an outcomes verified soil health program building on existing soil health principles to better facilitate climate smart agriculture as part of the agency's response to the recent executive order?
Well, I think not just NRCS, but I think across the department and our research agencies in the Forest Service, that we're going to have to be able to prove up the utility of climate smart agriculture and forestry. If the public is going to make investments, I think we need to be able to talk about the outcomes, not only for the climate, but for all the co-benefits that go along. So I think that measurement is going to be really important. NRCS already has some strong, the SEAP program and others, where they do a good job of looking at the benefits of improved conservation practices. I think more investment there is going to be important. And I think as you look at being able to reduce transaction costs for participation in markets, just to be able to prove up the importance of all the investments we make, I think there's a strong case to be made for investment around all those things. And as I think everybody certainly here knows, there are questions asked about whether it be soil health and soil carbon and the ability to measure. Likewise, on forestry, there are questions about the benefits, climate benefits from different forestry practices, livestock, nitrous oxide, all those things. And I think over the long term, if agriculture is going to have an important role to play in climate mitigation, I think we need to be able to prove this stuff up. And so I think investments in those places are going to be important.
You think the science is there yet for being able to reliably measure soil carbon in a place-based methodology?
I think the question is not, can we measure it? Yes, we can. And the science is there. The question is, can we do it cost effectively? And do we have to measure every single acre? Or can we, by operating at scale, have a high degree of certainty that that directionally we're doing very good things for the climate, and then we can put meaningful estimates on what the carbon gains are? And I think that's the question. And if we had unlimited resources, yeah, we could measure carbon very easily. The question is, how do we develop methodologies that allow us to have a high degree of certainty while doing it in a cost-effective way? And I think that's what the issue is. The issue is not whether we can measure it. Right. The issue is, can we do it cost-effectively in a way that's easy for farmers, ranchers, forest owners, and others to understand and participate in?
I think the other dimension to that then is the benefits flowing to the producers to the highest extent possible, rather than going into the measurement process or the middlemen. How would you respond to that?
That's exactly right. And whether it's thinking about if you have aggregators that are working with farmers and ranchers and forest owners to do this, or however these incentives are delivered, we want benefits to actually accrue to farmers and ranchers and forest owners. And so that's an important piece here. It's why if we can reduce the cost of participation, I think that'll be helpful to everybody.
Okay, I've got one final question, and we've got a lot of questions that have come in. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but this is another question that's been bouncing around NCAT and with a lot of our partners. I think you've done a good job covering the on-farm benefits and co-benefits of soil health practices. What about off-farm benefits, and like how can increasing soil carbon and soil health practices and cover cropping mitigate downstream or off-farm liabilities, especially related to flooding?
Yeah, I mean, enormous opportunities on water quality. You point out flooding, whether it's riparian buffers or conservation tillage cover crops. They're enormous downstream benefits. The challenge has always been how do we ensure that producers get some benefit from that? And that's an argument for conservation programs. It's also an argument for potential either private or municipal investment. You see some cities investing in conservation practices out in the countryside. So the question is, how do we make sure that those incentives for what is otherwise a public good, that those producers are able to capture some of that?
Yep. Well, as we see, especially in the upper Midwest, increasing extreme precipitation events and big deluges. It seems like a conversation that I would encourage you to have with your counterparts at FEMA.
Indeed, and I'm sorry I've got a hard stop and I have to jump, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonney. We appreciate your time.
We'll see y'all.
Thank you.